Make sure you subscribe to the Below the Surface podcast by Eclipsium in partnership with CRA. We've had the pleasure of speaking with some amazing guests, including Zeno Koba, Richard Hughes, Vincent Zimmer, and more. We discuss topics related to firmware and supply chain security, uncovering those pesky vulnerabilities that lie, well, below the surface in your environments. You can find all the episodes and subscribe by visiting eclipsium.com/podcast or searching for Below the Surface in your favorite podcast catcher.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. You're invited to InfoSec World 2024 at Disney's Coronado Springs Resort in Lake Buena Vista, Florida from September 23rd through 25th. Join top cybersecurity experts for this premier event. Save 25% on your pass by using code ISW24-SW25 when you register at securityweekly.com/InfoSec World 2024. Don't miss out on this exclusive opportunity. All right, and for this interview, Martin Resch joins us today to talk about shifting SecOps philosophies from threat-centric to compromise-centric. Martin is the original author of Snort, the founder of SourceFire, and early pioneer of the open core business model. Welcome to the show, Marty.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun to chat with you. I love it because we tend to go back and talk about how things once were, and how things need to shift, for us to continue moving forward here. And that's part of what I want to talk about today. Certainly, a lot of the conversations that I'm having now get a lot into. I guess are you familiar with Sunil Yu's cyber defense matrix?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's kind of affected like how I think of the different phases from identification to prevention. Then you've got detection, response, and recovery. And more the conversations I'm having and what I'm hearing from vendors, like the term resilience comes out a lot. At one point it was prevent everything, not a lot of focus on detection, right? And then it looks like we might get hacked, so detecting that attack and being able to respond to it might be important. So we started seeing SOAR products. We started threat hunting became a thing, and then got to the point to where, actually we might get hacked often enough that recovery is now really important, and there's now time frames that we have to do things in. We're just going to accept that, attacks happen, we might get breached, but operations have to carry on. We kind of got past this point of, okay, the breach isn't going to kill the business in the vast majority of cases. So we need to be much better at handling it. So, and all that starts with detection, right? Like you can't respond to something if you can't detect it, which still seems to be very, very difficult for organizations today. I often say that, I think we have a hoarding problem in InfoSec, where it's really hard for people to let go of their rules, of the data that they're, the alerts that they're getting, because there could be something important in that. Nobody wants to be the one that turned off a noisy rule and then got, the breach happens that could have been prevented if they didn't turn that rule off, right? Like, I guess that's sort of what the mindset is. So, are you seeing similar things? Like, how have you responded to this?
Yeah, well, I think it's always been something of an issue in the security world, kind of what people get comfortable with, and also the energy that they spend kind of getting to a level of equilibrium where they feel like they're being productive with the tools that they've got and they're getting useful information out of it and things like that. And I think that can, in a lot of cases, that can lead to this kind of getting comfortable with being comfortable, as opposed to driving things forward and kind of acknowledging the rate of change in the world that we're trying to protect, as well as the rate of change that we should expect from the tools that we're using. I think in the world of detection, especially, it's been pretty fascinating. And I've basically been working on detection my entire career, the last 28 years, from honeypots to IDSs and IPSs to beyond EDR, and things like that. And it's a really fascinating field, but to some degree, I tend to be somewhat of an empiricist when I talk about detection. And I do, because I have been doing it for so long, I do like to look back now and say
Yeah.
things like, okay, how did that work out for us? Did that actually provide us with value? Did we find that that was an approach that actually worked out and provided a lot of value for everybody who used it, a small subset of the people who used it, almost nobody who used it,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. And I don't think that level of introspection happens with a lot of people in the industry, especially on the operational side, where maybe they don't feel like they have the remit.
Well, just you said, is it providing value? I think something as simple as that can be hard for a lot of people to answer when talking about a security control or a technology or a product that they're using. I think security is in this unique position where you can spend $1 million on a product and it just doesn't occur to you to track whether or not you're getting any value out of that product. Like it's just a thing that you buy and you sling into the cloud or the data center or what have you, and it does its thing. And it's unless you're doing something to produce those metrics or to test it and see if it's actually working, that you've actually configured things correctly. Like one of my favorite examples to give is one of the things that Equifax did that was right before their breach is the emerging threats group created a snort rule, and then they handed it off to the ops folks who deployed that snort rule. Nobody thought to test the snort rule to see if they'd written it correctly. It's just no engineer mindset here. So how do you know when you're getting value out of something itself is a big challenge, I think, for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I think, metrics get attached to a lot of security, and people talk about TCO and ROI and all those kinds of things. And I guess at a fundamental level, and, to some degree that gets measured, especially by more advanced organizations that have kind of the process to do it, or the CISO level involvement where they're trying to surface those kind of metrics. But, functionally, operationally, when you look at the value that's being produced by a non-functioning snort rule, or a snort rule that's way too noisy, or whatever, or any detection, looking at things like, how often does this thing actually tell me about stuff that I need to be worried about versus telling me about stuff that I never need to be worried about, and what do I have to do to get from initial detection of thing that may or may not be a problem to deciding that it really is, and then I need to actually do something about it. It's a very difficult question to answer, but it's a really interesting thought exercise, especially as somebody who's created detection technologies, more than one over the decades. Um, finding and trying to determine, where do we think the value is actually going to be? What would actually be valuable? Threat detection, and I know we're going to talk about compromise detection, things like that. Um, so it's this constant question. And back when I was much younger, I was just like, hey, let's just define everything that's a bad thing on the internet, and then we'll just detect it all, and job done.
Yeah.
And now it's like, well, I told you about 50,000 log4j attacks today, so you're welcome. And would you like to know which one you actually should care about? Well, that's somebody else's problem.
So, Marty, how do you convince folks it's okay to turn off noisy stuff? How do you get people to like I call it red flags and yellow flags, right? Like a red flag type of event, it's bad every time you see it. Like if Mimikatz is dumping creds, if the receptionist PC is creating new domain admin accounts, like there's certain things that are bad every time you see them, right? Uh, but then those maybes, those noisy maybes, just make it almost impossible to see those red flags. So, is that something you do within a product where you just don't let people do it? Or, is that a training issue? Selling a product that has the potential to get super noisy and become a busy work generator, as I kind of think of it. How do you prevent people from making the product not useful anymore, or reducing the value?
Well, that is an excellent question. So I have a fair amount of experience in this world as well. Obviously coming from the intrusion detection and prevention side of the world, it was very easy for customers in the old days to really set things up in extremely noisy configurations, defaults, and stuff like that. And convincing them to not do that. Sometimes you could be like, "Ooh, you really shouldn't do it like that. It's going to affect performance, and you're not going to get a lot of value from the data that it's producing," things of that nature. And then there were other places you go to be like, really shouldn't ever run this in the default configuration because it's not made to be run that way. This is just like suggestions to get you started. And they'll say things like, "Well, our compliance guy says this is the way it's got to be done, so this is the way we're doing it." It's like, okay, well, that's crazy, but here we are. And then you have kind of the rest of the world that just wants to be productive. And we went so far in the old days, in the SourceFire days, to produce whole new technologies that could actually answer the question about the impact of an event. So, one of my real pet peeves in the security detection world is when we talk about priority, right? Prioritization. So, this is a high medium event? This is high medium or low event. Where does that come from? Like, where does it come from? And if you actually, it's kind of like how our baby's made. If you actually knew where it came from, well, the guy in the lab who created the detection in the first place said, when this goes off, it's high priority. And that's where like 99.999% of event prioritizations come from.
Right.
Well, that's not actually what the customer wanted to know. What the customer actually wanted to know is how much should I care? And that's a little bit of a different question, actually. And if you should care about this a lot and it's high priority come together, look at that right now. But if it's like this, you should care a lot and it's low priority, well, you can safely put those away till later. And I think a lot of people don't really go through kind of the mental exercise of not just is this false positive, this false negative, is this true positive or not, but also where's my level of caring and how am I going to get there? How am I going to do that repeatably in a way that's consistent across all the detections that I'm capable of doing for every environment that I'm in and things like that? And that's actually a very, very difficult problem. And I kind of call this domain the externalities of these detection systems. So, externalities are things like my coal-fired power plant generates power for all my people that are subscribed to my power service, which is nice. But the externality is that people who live 1,000 miles downwind of me, they get acid rain. But that's kind of their problem. In the intrusion detection and prevention, and the whole detection side of the world, doing the primary detection, that's what you paid for. The externalities are now you get to figure out how much you care, and that's left as an exercise to the reader to some extent. And I don't think most people kind of they do get to the point where they realize, oh man, I got to do all this stuff. I've got to build this huge pipeline of people, process, and technology to take this raft of undifferentiated noise and turn it into, oh, you've got one incident over here where you really need to kick off your IR playbook. And that journey that people have to go through, it's kind of unfair that, everybody has to go through it over and over and over again in every organization that they get into. And a lot of, especially larger enterprises with real budgets and things like that have actually gotten the opportunity to build those organizational kind of memories and genetics, essentially, so that they can do it very repeatably and do it for all the technology. But most people are just stuck like figuring it out on a day-to-day basis. And it's really kind of a crappy place to be because it's not providing much value. Where's the value there?
Yeah, I remember standing up customer success for a vendor I was working for a couple of years ago, and that was one of the things we were trying to do. We had the metrics to see somebody was just getting bombarded with alerts, and we built a product that was designed to have almost no false positives. It was a deception product. So anytime somebody touches a honeypot, it should be a 1-for-1, but you find these weird cases where like some AV tools will do port scanning and you just find these weird edge cases when you put sensors out there. And we would call people up and say, you can't possibly be getting any value out of this. This thing is just bombarding you with attacks. And I found that was the best we could do, is just hit them up and say, hey, can we jump on a call and help you tune this better?
Yeah, well, exactly. And, to some degree, my thinking has evolved, and this is getting more towards the compromise-centric side of the world, to where I kind of think detecting the threats is kind of sort of interesting, but there's so much noise out there about kind of the fundamental threats, fundamental threat or, the point of attack of that's a log4j attack. That's a whatever, a SQL Slammer attack or
Right.
something ancient like that. Like identifying those things, not particularly useful these days relative to detecting compromise, which is like, hey, this printer is port
Yeah.
scanning. Probably never
Yeah.
good, right? Things that should never happen. So you get in the deception side of the world where you've got, this thing should never be screwed with, right? So this is just a um, kind of it's a policy-based, exception-based detection model, which is if anybody touches
Yeah.
this wet paint that says don't touch the wet paint, we know it's been touched,
Yeah.
and that's bad. Look for the guy with paint on his finger, right? Um, so getting to a modality where I could start identifying, well, okay, what are the things that should never happen? And this is actually okay. So I'll tell you a story. So back in the snort days, the early snort days, when it was snowballing and turning into this big thing, people would ask me, how should I tune this? And I would say, well, turn off all the rules and then turn the rules back on that apply to the technologies that you're actually running in your environment,
Right.
and then write a set of rules for the stuff that should never happen. Like I should never see an outbound port 22 SYNAC packet except for my shell server. And if I ever see anything otherwise, I know like somebody's like either stood up SSH someplace or somebody who doesn't work here has stood up SSH someplace
Right.
that they shouldn't. So, just those simple things of like detect the stuff that should never happen, detect trust boundary violations, like, dev and prod don't talk to each other in modern environments. And if they ever do, that's a problem. Detecting those things and being able to codify those things is actually super useful and kind of always interesting. And as opposed to like, here is every time I see somebody touching this Cisco iOS XE vulnerability, or I see this set of packets get launched over the wire that are trying to exercise this thing, I'm going to generate an alert, and you'll figure out whether or not it's actually hitting that device later. I think that we built that, we did that for 20 years. It generated massive waves of generally noise and a small number of useful detections. And I would, to some degree, and as a person who did a lot of fundamental work there and, like made my name around it, as an older man now, I ask myself, how much did we actually help people? There were other models available to us that we could have tried, and we didn't because the snowballed and people liked it so much. But like, should we have gone to a more compromise-centric model where we would just start looking for the things that should never happen anywhere? And most people weren't really, I would tell them to do that, and they just wouldn't. They were just so busy, like doing the fundamental stuff, that they're like, I don't have time to figure out what should never happen in my network.
Right.
Well, okay, but if you did,
it should be the core of it, right? Yeah. Yeah. So when you say moving from threat-centric to compromise-centric, are you talking about like the moving from just looking at the individual atomic actions, like this could be an attack, to putting it all together, more of a story, more of a pattern of things that well, so again, back to my red flag, yellow flag concept that I came up with. Like, these three yellow flags could be a red flag. Like, you never want to see these three things happen in sequence. But individually, it might be totally fine. Is that kind of what you mean when you say compromise centric?
yeah, it can totally be that sort of thing where you're kind of doing, we call that compositing, where I've
Yeah.
got, so I've got milk, sugar, cookie, or milk, sugar, eggs, and flour. That's cookies,
Yeah.
right? So that's always cookie. So being able to identify that and then generate eventing around that, yeah, that's a composite. But there's other things too. So for example, I just talked about the Cisco iOS XE vulnerability. So this was an attack where basically an attacker could hit the management port of a Cisco device running iOS XE. And if they hit it with this compromise, they could basically take over the switch or router or whatever that was running it. Okay, bad, right? It's like seriously bad thing. And detecting that attack and being able to block it, super cool if you can, if you're in the right place to do so. But here's the thing. Is it more useful for me to detect the fact that this attack has been seen in flight than it would be for me to say, I identify all the iOS XE devices on my network. And if I see their management boards ever talking to something that's not like my network operations team, which is very codifiable, usually they live in a certain place on the network and they, do things in very certain ways. Like if I ever see it talking to something that's not that, I know things have gone off the rails. I don't actually need to deploy all this logic and keep it up to date and curate the detection platforms, all the other stuff that goes along with it in order to do that and try to interdict it when it's in flight and things like that. When I can just say, hey man, these are all my devices in my environment and here's how we identify them, and we can do so automatically. And if I ever see them express a behavior that's not the normal behavior of how they interact with our network operations team, then, total problem. It's never not a problem. And that's a much simpler way of expressing, kind of getting to the same conclusion, which is we've got a problem over here.
How much of the problem has been propagated by vendors over the years? Because we started this whole conversation talking about volume and noise, right? And now we've moved into finding the needle in the haystack. And what Adrian said, yeah, sometimes we create our own haystacks. But in that journey, from 30 years ago to now, we've got all these vendors creating products, right? And because people don't know what to measure, they don't know what to look for, they don't know how to tune appropriately for their environment, they don't know the prioritizations. The vendors have just given everybody a lot of stuff. There's a lot of noise, there are a lot of logs, there are a lot of alerts. So how much of this is self-inflicted? And I know these are in the show notes, so I'm not giving away the secret here. How much are AI systems, machine learning, advanced math helping today?
Great questions. So that's kind of it's a nuanced question with a bit of a maybe nuanced answer. We'll see if I can nuance it. So here's the thing. The vendors that have the tools that are out there are kind of, they're locked into their architectures to some degree. So their ability to bring net new capability to the table that's going to do things differently is actually pretty rare, because they're locked into their business models very frequently, and they just don't throw off enough cash to be able to finance kind of a fundamental rethinking of how to attack the problem to give you better outcomes. And this is one of my critiques and pet peeves about where the network security industry has ended up, and why my company that I've been building for the last few years is structured to deal with it. And it's that we built these tools and these architectures for 25 years, and they were so successful enough that we became locked into the architectures that they were built around, and you just don't have enough push from the vendors who are making the money off of them to change them fundamentally to try to rethink the problem in this world that we're in now. So I think that the vendors do tend to keep us locked into their way of thinking about it, because until they have kind of an external threat to push them to a new way of doing things. So like the AV vendors and the transition to EDR, for example, was a good example where you had the cloud unlocked EDR. Basically, once the cloud existed, you could build EDRs, and before it existed, you really couldn't. And initially, the pre-existing architecture from the pre-existing antivirus vendors, they pushed back on it. They were like, you don't need to worry about that. That's not the way that things are going to go. And they had spent 20 years making a lot of money or so off of the old way of doing it. And then the EDR vendors came along and basically wiped them off the field. Not exactly overnight, but pretty quickly. So sometimes, the kind of the status quo organizations that are kind of, locked in their business model and making their money and doing their thing, they don't have a lot of reason to change the status quo until something pushes them off the mark. And in security, I think that's particularly problematic. And we see in security that the place that innovation really comes from in this industry is from the startups. They're the guys who move the balls forward because they have no incentive to do things the old way. They're purely incented to not just disrupt, but to really fundamentally rethink the problem and take clean sheet approaches. And that's where we really see big advances.
But then we have the problem where it's safe to buy the old guard and it's not safe to buy the new guard. You're in a position, right? That because you are both the old guard and the new guard. So that gives you an advantage that some entrepreneurs don't have. You've got these 30-year-old CEOs, co-founders of companies coming up. Who knows them, right? And so you've got this, do I buy the tool that I think is going to work for our cloud native business, or do I buy the thing that's had a company name attached to it for 25, 30 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is safety in the herd, right? And unless you see you can really see marked benefits, that can really slow down adoption of some technologies. I think that, interestingly enough, back when I got my start, nobody knew who the heck I was. And as I got, more successful and things kind of transpired, eventually I got to the point where I wasn't just like duking it out every day trying to make my startup not flame out and crash, but actually, we were successful in making money and things were going well and landing big customers and all the other stuff, to the point where people started asking me what I thought about startup XYZ. Or I see pitch decks and, people ask me my opinions on things. And one of the things I always looked at, so I look at what are they doing? Like what's the actual approach and what problem are they solving, things like that. And then the second thing I always looked at was, who's the team that is building this and where do they come from? Is it first timers? Do they come out of academia? Do they come out of government, military? Have they built other startups? And if you talk to venture capitalists that have been around for a long time, you'll hear them say very frequently, they bet on technologies, but the thing they really bet on is teams. And if you're an unknown, that definitely puts some drag on your business. And I took a big haircut when I got SourceFire started because nobody knew who the heck I was. I was a guy with an engineering degree who, A, built a bunch of free software and got people enthusiastic about it, and then B, invented my own business model for selling it. And people were like, you got to be kidding me. Because I had no business making a business model, like thinking up a new business. But there we were, and it did work. But I definitely got discounted pretty heavily in my A round when I did that.
So let's talk a little bit about this AI ML space. I personally have a problem with AI as a terminology, but in the show notes, it talks about what this is doing. What do you see? What is your perception? What is your feeling about how much this will help, not help, hurt detection and finding compromise, detecting compromise?
Yeah. So I think it's pretty interesting. I think machine learning is helping because it can very sensibly help you do things like we use it for setting thresholds in our product and stuff like that, for our threshold driven stuff. So we will learn your network environment for a little bit, and then we will, figure out how we should configure our rules so you don't have to do it by hand. Very useful. And then there's, the AI driven stuff like LLMs, where we're using LLMs to translate between English and, product custom languages and things like that, or do summarization of events, things of that nature. And that's pretty useful too. And you're seeing some work being done around that, although it is difficult to kind of keep it going very consistently because of kind of the endemic problems with how some LLMs work and how they get implemented, certainly because we're still early. But then you have kind of the promise and the overpromise of AI, which is like, this is just going to solve our security problems. And, we look at it right now. So, I'm a CEO, like obviously I have a very technical background, but I look at the data that we're dealing with on an annual basis. We've got trillions of data points going into our cloud-based backend right now. And when you hear trillions, you think, oh, train your AI on that data set and, security magic will happen. But it's actually incredibly expensive to do that. And you've got to curate that model on an ongoing basis to keep it detecting things that are relevant to, across your entire customer base and things like that. There's no magic there. And, you have to get to ask and answer the question, is it going to be accurate? Is it going to give us low false positives? Because if I spend $100,000 training up a new detection model using all the data that I've got here, and it gives me a 3% false positive rate. Guess what? It's worthless. I still spent the $100,000, but I can't use it. It's not useful for anything. So, it's got there's a lot of really there's a lot of limitations on where you can take it right now still, despite all the enthusiasm that's out there. And, hopefully your AI isn't a data center full of people in some remote part of the planet, because that's certainly a possibility as well. I think it's very overhyped. It's extremely popular with marketers and investors right now, and we have to be circumspect, I would say, about over promising and under delivering, because that's a big problem this industry has.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that either security people's fears about being overtaken, we're not even close to that yet, but also their dreams of being a lot more efficient, they're going to take a lot longer to get to. I think we're at the very, very beginning when it comes to having AI help create something that's actually going to make appreciable time savings in our security operations programs. That's just me, but we'll see, I guess.
All right. So I was, moving back towards detection and what netography does. So kind of taking this, all this knowledge you have over decades now of, the way detection works, way it doesn't work. I imagine you're pouring all that into what netography does. And, certainly one of the things I've noticed, it's not that we didn't put IDS between internal network segments before. We didn't just put them at the edge. A lot of people just put them at the edge. Is it significantly easier to detect if we're talking at the compromise level, not just attacks? Is it significantly easier to detect compromise east-west versus north-south? Sitting on the edge there.
Yeah, I think it is easier to detect it east-west because you're more likely to see kind of people moving around in ways that are novel in network environments if you can instrument the east-west. And traditionally, the attackers are a little more comfortable moving in the east-west than they are in the north-south. Like, it's pretty straightforward to, use encrypted HTTP to get to, something in AWS or something in Google or, wherever, and essentially be able to communicate with the public internet in a way that's relatively unobserved. But in the east-west environment, looking at lateral motion, there's never really been something that gave us really pervasive visibility, observability across the east-west environment. Mm-hmm. So as an attacker, your ability to maneuver was kind of much better, much easier in the lateral motion world because you were more likely to be unmonitored for long periods of time. Because, at the end of the day, if I've got a campus or, a corporation that's got offices across, 300 buildings worldwide, and then I've got a bunch of stuff in the cloud as well. Nobody's looking across all of that because the architectures for doing, things like deep packet inspection just would never scale to it. Getting the sensors in the right places, instrumenting the interconnects, being in the right place to see things such as, somebody moving around inside of an existing building network or inside existing VPCs, just not particularly doable using DPI methodologies, deep packet inspection. You just can't scale the architectures. You just can't deploy enough sensors and curate them and keep them configured and reporting to you the things that you want to see. But when you go to an architecture like netography has, which is frictionless and leveraging your existing network infrastructure, both in the multi-cloud world and in the on-prem world, so that I can get observability across everything you've got, everywhere that you are, all the time, in real time, at scale. And like I said, without having to deploy appliances or agents to make it work, that changes the game on the level of observability that you can have in the cloud. And this is or not in the cloud, but in an enterprise. And this is one of the things that netography leverage the cloud to unlock. And this is, I think, and this is, obviously me talking my game a little here, but this is one of the things that really kind of has stricken me. So, it feels like network security has gone out of favor over the past, 5 or 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I'm coming to the opinion that the reason that it did is because the tools that were available to people to actually observe their environments, gain visibility, have detection, things like that, they never evolved with the evolving hybrid multi-cloud enterprises that we have today. And as a result, I could have decent, okay visibility in my on-prem world. And once again, I just have to go to log analytics and looking at application logs to see what's going on in the cloud world, because there was nothing available for cloud networking to see what was going on, unless you were deploying like eBPF agents most recently. Mm-hmm. And that was about it. Or we're prepared to dig through VPC flow logs, which got dumped into Splunk or some other data lake, which was kind of worthless for actually looking at the data. So I could ask questions like, "Hey, show me all the flows between point A and point B," and it would provide you with a table of those. And your ability to do math on those and to do operations and to do pivots and things like that was just not there. So we needed to have a new generation of tools that were architected for this world, which is what I believe that we did. But what is the thing that the cloud unlocked for us was the ability to build those tools. You just couldn't do it until the cloud infrastructure was there to build it.
Yeah. So many components we didn't have. Like my first SIM, we were using, it was an on-prem appliance with spinning disk and, flat file database, Sybase database. And, it was not uncommon for a query to take me 8 hours. We just don't live in that world anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, right. And nobody wants to, right? But it's, it's interesting. So because I've been around for so much of the history of this industry, it's interesting where you see where the cloud affected things, right? The cloud affected the ability to build EDR in kind of the 2008 timeframe, then did the same thing for log management in the kind of 2012, 13 timeframe. But nobody ever did it for the network, and now you can.
Right.
And building a platform that's architected for it is very difficult. You can't do it with kind of like everybody ran to data lakes, and it doesn't work if you do a data lake. You need real-time streaming analytics. You need a custom data backend to do it. But once you do it, all of a sudden it opens back up. So obviously we're betting big on being right about this because we're spending a lot of time and money doing it. But we think that there's a new generation of people who are going to be really interested in being able to see what's going on across their clouds, between their clouds, back to their on-prem world, that will be enabled by this architecture. Even if it's not us, this is the architecture to do it.
Right. And I imagine as we wrap up here, the other piece of that is still going to come back to detection engineering, right? Like once you have all the pieces there, getting the data, is just half of the problem, right? You still have the ability to create the busy work generator out of it, or you can get value. So what do you kind of, you mentioned, make a list of all the things that should never happen. Like I imagine some of those have to be the same across organizations. Like I can't imagine anybody wants to see, it's a bad example because it's not a network example, but Mimikatz, dumping creds. But there are some things that are common across, like how much of that detection engineering can you do on your side versus how much does the customer still have to kind of custom craft and have that detection engineering skill set to be able to do these days, to be able to succeed?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, awesome question. I think, so one of the things that we did is we staff our own detection engineering team. So we build our own detections with them as well as helping our customers out. But I think that having a detection engineering team these days is probably pretty critical if you really take it seriously, to be, especially in larger organizations, to be able to synthesize the data across all the data types and all the different platforms to figure out what's going on. And be able to do so, at scale, repeatably. So all of those things are kind of in the mix. But some things, we can things like everybody always knows dev and prod don't talk to each other. So if dev and prod are talking to each other, obvious problem. So we have generic, we have the ability to express business logic, this is the dev environment, this is the prod environment, codify what those are on the network, and then write about the relationships between the two, different areas of your organization as part of our detection modeling platform, for example. So those kinds of things are really powerful because you can pre-can those things that everybody always knows is bad and wrong. Nobody ever do that. So that's really useful. And there are other things like beaconing detection, C2 detection, and looking at, does my company talk to ITAR countries? And if the answer is no, then, it's very simple to put, here's a dashboard that shows all of our traffic to ITAR countries. It should always be blank. If it's ever not blank, that's a problem. So being able to do things like that, it's pretty straightforward. And then you get into kind of the enterprise specific stuff, which, detection engineering can have a hand in. And it could be simple stuff like, here are all the functional areas of our environment, and here's how they talk to each other, and they should never talk to each other any other way. Codify that sort of thing. And it can be more sophisticated, like I need to develop segmentation policy for my environment because I'm doing a zero trust initiative. So I need to be able to identify the footprints of all the applications that we've written in-house on the network, and having the tooling to be able to do that, to show you those sorts of things, so you can develop the segmentation policies and then test them and field them and make sure they're being they're not being changed out from under you and things like that. Those are all sorts of things that you can express in a platform that's doing this kind of compromise-centric view of things, because it's operating on metadata and it's able to see the business logic and things like that, that are really difficult to do in packet-based solutions. Just never going to happen in packet-based solutions because they don't scale and they can't even express the ideas. They don't have a concept of business logic.
Right. Yeah. So still some hard work to do there. But yeah, you got to know your environment. You got to be able to codify some of the stuff that happens within it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Marty, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. Always a lot of fun to talk to you, and I always learn a few things.
Well, thanks, Adrian. Good talking to you again. Good talking to you too as well, Katie. Thanks for your time today. I appreciate it.
Right. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly Enterprise News.